Welcome to the Prime Health Podcast with your host, Dr. Derek Barron. Dr. Barron interviews doctors, wellness experts, and healthcare leaders who are revolutionizing how we approach health and longevity. The Prime Health Podcast explores breakthrough science, personal and patient stories, and practical insights that are shaping the future of health and wellness. So sit back, listen in, and prepare to transform how you think about your path towards Prime Health with Dr. Barron and his special guest.
Hello, my name is Dr. Derek Barron, and welcome to another amazing episode of the Prime Health Podcast. We interview doctors, nurses, wellness experts, and healthcare leaders who are revolutionizing how we approach health and longevity. We explore breakthrough science, personal and patient stories, and practical insights that are shaping the future of health and wellness. Now, before we get into today's episode, a quick note from our sponsor, Grow Solutions, your growth partner for busy health and wellness professionals. We help you grow your business, your practice, ways in which it works best for patient communication, and helping you bring in more business to your company. If there's any way we can help, please just make a note. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn, or you can drop the word grow below. We'd love to be able to help you. All too often we have people that say, I'm too busy to grow, too slow to scale, or too overwhelmed to fix it. If that's you, we can definitely help. But today I want to get to our special guest, and that's Pete Williams. He's a master's in medical science, CS, IFM certified practitioner, a Bredesen trained practitioner, which is a very unique training component that he's been with for a very long time. He also specializes in corporate burnout, cardiovascular disease, brain health, gut health, and an expert in DNA testing. He's the founder of Functional Medicine Associates. Pete is an exercise and medical scientist. In 2002, he was part of the UK's founding group of CSCS, accredited by the National Strength and Conditioning Association of America. In 2004, he became the youngest ever recipient of the Lifetime Achievement Award for the Register of Exercise Professionals. In 2013, he was the first worldwide cohort to be awarded Institute for Functional Medicine Certified Practitioner status and has represented the Institute for Functional Medicine as a clinical innovator. He is already an early adopter of Dr. Dale Bredesen's training for understanding neurodegeneration, which again, we're going to talk about, which is extremely interesting nowadays. Pete has had over 20 years of experience applying functional medicine in clinical practice and is seen by his peers as one of the leading figures in functional medicine in the UK. He is a sought-after speaker, advisor in nutraceutical and lab testing companies. Pete has recently developed a genomics panel, DNA Smile, in collaboration with genomics company DNA Analysis and Nordic Labs to help patients and clinicians better understand their oral and systemic health condition. Throughout this time, he has treated people with a wide range of chronic conditions and diseases. Pete is a personal and professional advocate of exercise and key role in playing in his own health as well as others. He loves to practice what he preaches in all aspects of his life, including keeping up with his two young sons, which I can completely understand. So Pete, I really want to say welcome to the Prime Health Podcast.
Pleasure. Then got introduced to Dr. Jeffrey Bland, who is well known as the founding figure of functional medicine. I like to use the term the over-functionalization of functional medicine. And what I mean by that, and look, I sort of get it because, let me give you an example. And I suppose this is an example of my evolution, is that we're quite well known. I'm quite well known in the UK. So you may get people being referred to us and they're expecting you to do tens of thousands of pounds worth of testing that you could do, but probably doesn't have as much relevance with where that patient is currently at. So I think there is an indication where more testing is better, or that is where people will come in and they are judging your clinical expertise with regards to probably how much testing or imaging you can do. And I think based on where I am, that's sort of certainly not the first place I would go to. So I think there's an overemphasis on testing. Whilst, don't get me wrong, testing is great. I think there's an overemphasis on probably supplementation. Well, I think the difference in what we do is that we're probably a bit more of the conductor of the orchestra. So our specialization is understanding how do you go from an orchestra that's not playing great music to an orchestra that starts to play great music again. And so that's our role. And my expertise is be able to understand how everything fits together. I might not be an expert with regards to certain things like hormones, and we have a lot of women who are entering perimenopause. Obviously, our job is to understand how all that fits together. But certainly when we're talking about prescribing bioidentical hormones, I mean, again, you can't do everything. So we will have other consultants or other places that we will confer with to say, here's what we've done to this point. We think you need to go and see X. She goes to see X with our notes that go with that. We speak to those consultants to say, this is what we think you need to do. Can you do that bit? And then bring us back to us. So we have lots and lots of ways where we'll send off to cardiologists, neurologists, or hormone specialists. But our role is to understand, and then going back to your question, we'll have many people who come in with files from the cardiologist, the neurologist, the gastroenterologist, and our role is to get a patient to understand how all that fits together and maybe allow those consultants to understand what we need a little bit better. So a lot of the time, the departments and the specialities aren't talking together, because I think most chronic disease is underpinned by similar mechanisms. And, that's our expertise, to understand that if Mr. Singh comes in and he's type 2 diabetic, he's obese, and he's got periodontal disease, that these are not separate diseases. These are in an allopathic model, they are three separate diseases, but the mechanisms that are driving them are almost the same. So it's our understanding about being able to translate a really good message to the patient, to get them an understanding that some of the mechanisms or some of the genetics or some of the lifestyle aspects that you are doing are driving these three diseases. And if we can change some of those mechanisms and some of those inputs, we get on top of not just one, but we get on top of three diseases in one go. So it's just a little bit more from a point of view of, you understand the system, the whole orchestra. You're not an expert in any area, but you're an expert in understanding what needs to be done in what time, and what needs to be fixed, and who do you need to send them to. So, of course, we will do a lot of work of organising that, but occasionally we will need to send them off to a neurologist, a cardiologist, who thinks in a relatively similar way as well. We've sent them off to allopathic consultants who have sort of messed it up through no fault of their own. So there's definitely a change in, I think, the allopathic side, to understand that certainly functional medicine isn't going away. Systems thinking is not going away. And so we're much more embraced. But I think we're embraced because those separate specializations understand that actually we're probably doing a reasonably good job. Life Essential Aid that you'll see from the American Heart Association. And these are the fundamental pillars of lifestyle. When we talk about the longevity aspect, they have very little science that gives you an indication that this is going to be helpful. And the question is, like we say to everyone, if you're not sleeping well, if you're super stressed out, if you're not physically active, if your diet is poor, if your relationships and your community is poor, we have to concentrate and work on those. And look, we might do some really incredibly detailed stuff on that. So, I tend to do quite a lot around sleep and, silent obstructive sleep apnea. And that is because we see it more and more prevalent in people as they get overweight. So they're silently maybe not sleeping as effectively as they should do. And again, the less sleep that you have, the less optimal sleep that you have, then across the board, you see problems with regards to increased inflammation, increased cardiovascular risk, and increased neurodegeneration. So in many ways, what we're trying to say is, here are the pillars of health. Sure, if you want to go and take this or take that, if you want to spend that money, no problem. But whether or not that is validated enough that it's going to make you live a bit longer, I just don't think the literature is there. And, I don't think there's any supplement that has been proven to elongate health. And in fact, I'm pretty sure that there isn't. Are there supplements that have been shown that they may help some of the mechanisms that are associated with shorter lifestyles or longer lifestyles? Then yeah, but again, it's all theoretical. So, even your stuff like resveratrol, which was reported to be the player 10, 15 years ago, of course, David Sinclair's work, again, no evidence at all. So again, it comes back to, none of these are ever going to impact on any one day more effectively than you sleep well, you do your exercise, you eat well, and maybe keep those sort of calories down to some degree. Derek, we get people coming in where they're so stressed out about trying to get a structure correct because they've heard that they should be doing intermittent fasting or they should be doing this, that they lose all sense of what do we need to do and how do we need to do it. So we get these so many people that are overwhelmed with what they think they should do. And it can become really troublesome to sort of bring them back to some kind of honesty and normality, and also to come back to the robustness of what the scientific literature and the totality of the scientific literature is telling us. We see this all the time, particularly in the cardiovascular literature. And again, I get it, because, you know, if you set up a bias that you want to live by, then you can find any research that will back up that bias. It's fine. And you know what? That may be the right scientific literature for you. But you always have to start off with, before we start getting into personalized medicine, we're going to start that this is where we think the totality of the literature is with regards to, let me give you an example, cholesterol. Cholesterol is a great example of such a massive debate out there. The evidence is absolutely clear on the totality of the evidence, and it has been for the last 50 years, that if you are not taking into account cholesterol levels, then you may be missing the major chunk of the architecture that drives cardiovascular disease. Now, again, that is where the totality of the literature stands. Does that apply to every single person in the world? No, it doesn't. And again, because every piece of literature, number one, is the totality of the degree of how good the scientific evidence is. And so again, people can mix and match what they want to believe, and you can find a data that supports it. But you always have to go with the robustness of what the data is telling you and then work from there. So again, you know, it might be, I mean, I can think of 2 patients at the moment that are extreme outliers with regards to cholesterol. We've got one with very high cholesterol levels at the moment, no sign of any evidence of cardiovascular disease, and that's on CT angiogram with contrast. We're not sure why, but what we think is that this is a female who just hasn't been exposed to LDL for long enough. So that's our opinion on that. But then on the opposite side, we have an individual that is the atypical, couldn't be any more of a perfect athlete. All of the numbers with regards to metabolism, insulin levels, blood sugar control, hitting all the markers, VO2 max. And yet here's an individual with very mildly elevated cardiovascular disease, very mildly elevated ApoB levels, and very strong cardiovascular disease, literally 50% stenosis of his LAD. My. So again, I think there are examples of how you can see different things when you're personalizing things. But again, I think there's a lot of nonsense out there because anyone can say anything. I think you've got to be very careful who you listen to and why you listen to. Honestly, I do believe, unfortunately, patients are coming in and we spend more and more of their time, their paid time, trying to get an understanding of where their confirmational bias lies. Because if that doesn't suit where we think the bulk of the literature is, then we may be having some crosswords as clinician and patient, and that's fine. But again, it's important that that conversation is had to give them a deeper understanding that maybe the reason why they're not so well is because the strategy that they're currently using that they think might be making them better is actually making them worse. And I can give you a very good example of this because I see it all the time. Intermittent fasting is a classic example of something where I get quite a lot of, particularly female bias, of coming in with chronic fatigue-like symptoms, exhausted. And they're exhausted because they're not eating enough calories. And then when we put them to, and they're not eating enough calories because they think, if I don't eat enough calories, I'm going to live longer. But at the end of the year, when we run the body composition analysis through DEXA scanning, we see that they've also, as we've told them, is that if you carry on like this, you're going to lose more muscle mass than you started the year with, which is, of course, is what we see quite frequently. And so, look, again, it's making sure that, and look, and it's not easy because you've got to do a lot of work and there's always a lot of checks and balances. But again, a lot of the time there is this component of, I'm going to do X because I think that is going to be helpful for me. And actually with quite a lot of our patients, it's not proved fruitful for them.
Yeah.
And so you've got to be able to have that conversation, which I think is absolutely key. So when we bring people on, they come into a program. They don't come into, you just come and see me occasionally. We set up our programs is that you're probably going to work with us really robustly for 6 months, because we want to get all the data sets out. We want the genetics, and we want to have a deep understanding of who you are, so that as we go forward on that, we can play this out in real time and see whether it works or not, and be able to have enough conversation that we're having an understanding of what you're doing on a daily basis. Because some people, they're trying to do the right things, but they're having a completely miserable time about it. And actually on some of the metrics, it's not working for them at all. Talk about DNA Smile is that DNA Smile for me was obviously I deal with that neurodegeneration side. I also deal with the cardiometabolic. We know that bacteria that maybe should stay in one place but move to another, so MALF to systemic, are quite a strong underlying mechanism that can drive disease. So if I give you a very quick example, there's one bacteria in particular called Porphyromonas gingivalis. It is a very robust pathogen, and if it translocates from the mouth to the brain, which we know it does, then that can be one of the mechanisms that drives neuroinflammation, and one of the mechanisms that may be contributing long term to Alzheimer's disease risk. And there's been many papers in the literature that show that to some extent Alzheimer's is an infectious disease. And, we see this with COVID, we know that is. And we know, again, what we've got to think about is, this is where I'm very keen in the literature to understand how bacteria translocate, but also the strength and the condition of our great barriers, and whether that's the oral mucosa or whether that's the gut barrier. If those barriers are not secure, things that shouldn't translate across do translate across. And when that happens, you're going to have an immune system that just does its job. So you're always going to have an immune system where it's switched on, creating a defense mechanism, destruction, inflammation, and this ongoing pattern. And so that's one of the mechanisms of why I wanted to develop DNA Smile. I knew the genetics company. I understood the literature quite well with regards to oral microbiome, oral bacteria, particularly the red pathogen group, and their consequences, not just on neuroinflammation and Alzheimer's risk, but on cardiovascular disease. A strong association with some of these bacteria and cardiovascular disease risk. In a sense, bacteria translocating out the mouth, getting into the vascular system and causing problems because the immune system is tagging it. And again, it's really an exciting area, because certainly we're seeing an oral pathogen, creating quite a lot of noise now in the scientific literature with regards to its risk factor for colon cancer. So again, an oral pathogen is translocating through the mouth, or obviously is causing disease by gravity, i.e. you swallow it, and then it is finding itself into the colon. And it's one of the mechanisms that is driving potential risk for colon cancer. And I know the company in the US who are doing the full microbiome spectrum are very keen on this. So, they're very keen to flag that if they do not want to see FN in one of their microbiome samples, because the risk for colon cancer is really quite high. So again, gives you a really good indication of this systemic disease aspect. I also wanted to run DNA Smile to have this cardiometabolic neurodegeneration aspect to it. So we put some genes in there associated with dysregulation of sugar, increased risk of type 2 diabetes. And I wanted to do that because periodontal disease, gum disease, is literally the same disease as type 2 diabetes. The mechanisms that drive both literally look the same. So in many ways, if you can help improve the oral health of a type 2 diabetic patient, you create the environment to have the knock-on effect that it should help them with regards to their type 2 diabetic risk. And vice versa, if the type 2 diabetic situation gets worse, then the oral disease gets worse as well. So again, this is the mechanism of where you're trying to take out, you're essentially treating the mechanisms underlyingly that should treat both diseases. Now, one of the other things I wanted to do, because a lot of our patients come in and ask me, should I take my mercury amalgams out? Not being a dentist, my answer to that was, well, I'm not sure. But I did start having patients, again, who've got the money and, they can do what they want, suddenly take all their mercury amalgams out because they heard on social media that is something that you should do and mercury should never be in their mouth. Not knowing, of course, the next steps is, well, number one, was the extraction done correctly? And there's lots of evidence to suggest that many mercury fillings are relatively stable and you can make real issues if you take them out inappropriately. So that was number one. And number two, well, what are you going to put back in? Because some of these mercury amalgams, certainly in one of my patients, were huge. And so they've had to have new teeth completely reconstructed, which was thousands and thousands of pounds. So one of the key things I wanted to do was look at some of the genes that are associated with increased risk of problems around mercury and the detoxification of mercury. And so we slipped some genes into DNA Smile with regards to that. And look, and that's not because those are the genes that are going to make your decision, because these decisions need to be made in the context of what the gene panel is telling you, the clinical picture, and then what the dentist feels as well. So what I wanted to do is give patients more clinical certainty that if they were going to go down that route, then we had more certainty based off genetic data that might be a smart thing to do, rather than just take them out and see where we go. So again, that's where I think DNA Smile, we built a clinician's course as well, that you can take the course to understand the genetics. Only takes a day, and then you can start using the test. But I think where it's lagged a little bit is because it's a very systems thinking panel. And again, I think the world needs to just sort of catch up. You've been doing it for such a long time, like me, you sort of expect everyone to sort of, well, doesn't everyone think like this? And you do find that it's a bit slow for people to start catching on. So something that seems so simple for you, i.e. we do oral bacterial swabs on all our cardiovascular patients. It's normal procedures for us to do that and get them an understanding of, well, what is your oral health? Because localized disease causes very systemic effects. Want to know, and we did the story of a 56-year-old rheumatoid patient that we had who'd been with a functional medicine clinician for over a year, done thousands of pounds worth of tests, loads of protocols, thousands of pounds worth of supplementation, and actually wasn't getting any better. And by chance she came to me, and the key red flag straight away, and no one's fault, was that no one asked her what her dental health was, and she had very severe periodontal disease. And of course, periodontal disease and rheumatoid arthritis, again, very strong association. The mechanisms that are driving both are very similar. I said, look, I think this is the thing that we need to deal with. I'm going to send you off to this dentist. I will build a systemic program for you that will help what you're having done orally. And within 16 weeks, she went from very severe to pretty much in remission. And it was so life-changing that we thought we better write this up. And look, it's an N of one study, but what it showed us is the power of understanding systems thinking. And she remains asymptomatic to this day. But it did show the power of what you can do if you understand how it all fits together. And look, we're probably a bit lucky on that one as well. But it did show the power of, wow, this is amazing what we've been able to do with this. Now, look, it doesn't always work like that, because what I would say on that patient is that I think the biggest success that we do is whether a patient has the capacity to be compliant and the time to be able to take the steps that they need to take. And she was just one. She'd had enough. She was ready to change, and touch wood, a bit of luck in it, and it worked really well.
Well, it seems like you're always prepared for those opportunities that are coming in, which is great. This brings me to a question, Pete, that you kind of started out in the healthcare personal training-ish, if you wish, that arena. You've advanced to now creating with a large company your own genomic panel. What would you say has been the attribution to your own business success?
I would say going bankrupt in 2004. The bankruptcy, I think I'm a very good big picture guy. I think at the time I was an incredibly poor businessman. You have to realize that there is a balance between what you want to do and what is practical from a business perspective. Although it had a really big impact on me, I mean, I was literally broke. I lost everything on that. It gave my health a real big hampering as well for the time. I needed a couple of years out of not trying to push, just to, number one, have a break, And then number 2, just gently get back into things. But it really fine-tuned me into understanding and look, the joke about this is that even with my accountant, when he starts talking about profit and loss and assets in the bank, I'm like, just tell me we're doing okay. Yeah. So I still wouldn't suggest that I'm a numbers guy, but I think going bankrupt showed me how not to do things. Well, we were very lucky that we have a marketing team as well. So probably just our website, Functional Medicine Associates, you'll see me and some of the team who all have different specializations. I've got actually really good Instagram following. We're getting on to 60,000. And one of the key things that I wanted to do on Instagram, I do exercise of the day. And obviously because of my original background and some of my training as well, and also what we know with chronic disease, if you're not moving on a daily basis, you're never going to have optimal health. And I started developing an Instagram post, which was just about exercise snacks. And it really is about, if you do a little bit more each day, then that's going to influence your health on a longer term. And so our Instagram, again, is something that I'll do. I will try probably 2 or 3 times a week to generally do exercise of the day. We've just started our functional medicine Instagram as well, Functional Medicine Associates, which is more, maybe a little bit more harder hitting facts as well. With regards, we just put one on about why muscle is so important as you age. It is an organ of longevity. And again, the whole point about this is that you need to start your journey early. If we know anything about muscle mass, if we know anything about cardiovascular disease, and I would say this to, if you are a 50-year-old male or female, listen to this, with a family history of cardiovascular disease, and maybe, you're that as well, is that you need to give your kids the gift of, let's start them with very healthy behaviors early on and get those teenagers, do your first blood test on your teenagers. So you're getting an indication about the lipids shouldn't be elevated at that point. And if they are, maybe you're starting to see the early signs of cardiovascular risk. And you have the ability with a good clinician to completely stop that. We have the tools in cardiology to be able to stop this. The world's biggest killer. Intervening early is the key thing. Don't wait until you're in your 50s where it's already can be quite well developed. And you can't just stop that process. You might need much more intensive treatments by that stage. That would probably be my message on that side.
Okay, fantastic. Well, Pete, I really want to say thank you very much for, being a guest on our podcast. I love this because I get to learn, and I get to learn from some leading experts like yourself and your company with Functional Medicine Associates. So for our viewers and listeners, if you found today's conversation valuable, of course, please subscribe, but more importantly, share this message. And I ask you to share that because it's a friend or a family member, a colleague that could benefit. What Pete and his company do is really important to the world. And the more you share this and let somebody learn from it, the better they're going to be in the long run. So until next, remember that true wellness is a journey. We're all on this together. So whether you're taking charge of your own health or guiding others on theirs, every step forward matters. I just ask you that you take care of yourselves. I can't wait to see you on our next episode. Thanks again for your time, Pete.
Thank you. Cheers. Pleasure.